Hi, I'm Jo Clark, and thanks so much for joining me today. This is the Redefining Midlife podcast, a podcast designed for the 40-plus woman who is determined to challenge society's myths and beliefs around midlife. It's for the woman who is inspired and ready to define midlife her way. Join me each week as I chat to health and wellness experts for up-to-date information on how to live well as some special conversations with incredible everyday women redefining what midlife can look like. Here's to making our next half of life even better than the first. Osteopenia and osteoporosis may not be the sexiest topics in town, but I've got absolutely no doubt that the information in this episode has got the potential to change the lives of many listeners. Now, not many people realise that peak bone mass occurs between the ages of 25 and 30. And by the time we reach the age of 40, we slowly begin to lose bone mass. The changes in hormones due to menopause and getting older has got a huge impact on bone health. We know that women are particularly vulnerable to having unhealthy bones, and current data shows that about half the women over the age of 50 will break a bone because of osteoporosis. And 80% of people with osteoporosis are women. It's crucial then that women become proactive and protect their bones more, because they're 4 times more likely to get bone disease than men. And being proactive starts with learning more about bone health. So I'm beyond thrilled to have one of the world's leading researchers in this area on the podcast. Belinda Beck is a professor of exercise science at Griffith University, Gold Coast, Queensland, and the Menzies Health Institute Queensland. Her work, which is primarily related to the effects of mechanical loading on bone, has involved both animal and human models from basic to clinical research. Professor Beck's particular focuses have been exercise interventions across a lifespan for the prevention of osteoporotic fracture and the management of bone stress injuries in athletes and military recruits. She's been awarded over $3 million in research funding, published over 100 scientific papers, and presented almost 200 abstracts at conferences and symposia nationally and internationally. I'm exhausted just reading that. And in 2015, Belinda established the Bone Clinic, which is a translational research facility and clinical practice providing evidence-based exercise, or Onero in brackets, for people living with osteoporosis. Now, you're going to hear a lot of practical information throughout our chat, so a pen and paper may be handy. Now, after I stopped recording, Professor Beck and I chatted just that little bit longer, and we both realised that there was just another little gem of some helpful information that we could add to this episode, so be sure to listen out for that. Also, if you know someone who would benefit from the information in this episode, please be sure to share it, because the more women who get access to this, the better it is. Welcome, Professor Beck, to the Redefining Midlife podcast. I'm so excited to learn all things bone related and what we can do to help women who are wanting to know more about how they can look after their bone health. So welcome.
A pleasure to be here.
Now, Professor Beck, before we get into learning more about bone health and osteoporosis, I'd love you to share where your interest first began.
Well, I think, as with most researchers, your desire to answer a question comes from a problem that you have or someone that you love has. And back in the day, I was a runner and a hockey player, and I used to get the sorest shins, and I couldn't figure out why. Nobody could help me. They couldn't fix them and they couldn't prevent them. And it made no sense to me. This is in the 80s, and it wasn't the dark ages. But people would just say, oh, well, you're obviously using the wrong shoes anyway, whatever advice they gave me, it didn't work. So I began investigating bone and the response of bone to what we refer to as mechanical loading, which is essentially exercise, as a master's student and a PhD student. And that took me through a path of sort of some animal research, and it became very obvious that it has nothing to do with shoes. It has to do with the natural process of bone remodeling, which happens naturally. And it's a way that we can improve our bone mass to make it stronger to prevent fractures happening. And it's a way that we can replace bone tissue that has become damaged. It's an amazing tissue. So anyway, that sort of led me into stress fracture sort of research. And then I realized that actually the biggest burden and risk to people in their life, it's not stress fractures. That happens in the military and to athletes and and some of us who are sort of recreational athletes. But the big thing that affects many, many, many people at the end of their life, or even from the middle of their life, is osteoporosis. So that's where I turn my attention to what's the best exercise loading for bone health per se, and how do we apply that throughout life so we prevent osteoporotic fracture.
So at some point, and that was an interest, when did it turn into a passion? Because what you're doing, and to keep on going, it can't be just something I'm a bit interested in. It has to be a passion. Otherwise, you would have left this area long ago. So at what point did you go, oh, this is really lighting me up, I've got to learn more?
I think it was right back as a PhD student when I was actually doing research on turkeys. Now, I didn't do that for very long because animal research is not for me. It's I don't have the heart for it. So just when you discover how incredible bone is and how amazing it is that it can respond to changes. So somebody who has never done any exercise in their life, if they begin an exercise program, bone just adapts to that. And we see it very obviously in muscle, but you don't see it in bone because they're inside. You have to scan to see that. And I just have always been fascinated by that effect, and the way that we can actually harness that effect so that we can get these adaptations in safe ways. It's just that most of us, including me as a 16-year-old, running training, doing too much too soon, which doesn't allow the bone to adapt. So we've got to always respect the biology of the tissue. So yeah, I don't know, the minute I started working with bone, I was hooked, fascinated, and I wanted to keep working with it.
Yeah, I suppose with the advancements of new technologies as well, and new things that you can do with what we're learning in other areas of science as well, it's always something new to discover. So that would be exciting also for a researcher, perhaps.
Yeah, I am interested in bone imaging, and I do work on it on the side, but I don't find that side of it quite as fascinating. I think the biology side of it is really fascinating. I do I do tend to laugh when I see people trying to create medicines for tissues that if you just did some exercise, it would heal them. So there's an equivalent sort of problem with muscle as with bone called sarcopenia. So if we don't use our muscles as we age, you're probably aware the muscle size shrinks and we get weak. And more importantly, we can't do a lot of the things that we used to be able to do when we had nice, strong muscles. So that really influences our quality of life. So the pharma companies are busy trying to invent medicine that will stop sarcopenia. And whenever I listen to talks about this, I look around the room saying, there's a perfect thing that overcomes sarcopenia. It's called exercise, and it doesn't actually take a huge amount. It certainly doesn't require years and years of drug discovery. So I think we have to keep in mind that exercise is this incredibly powerful therapy. It doesn't help absolutely everything. Their medicines are really important for various things, but for muscle and bone, it's incredibly powerful.
It's that whole mindset for a lot of people, isn't it? The quick fix. And that's what Big Pharma is probably looking at. Quick fix means that it means a quick turnover for them as well. Yeah.
And the reality is, and I have to, sort of not get too excited about it, but because there is a proportion of the community who doesn't want to exercise. Doesn't matter how good it is, they will never exercise. So that's presumably where pharma is focusing their attention. And, I can just, the problem is most of us do things that aren't particularly good for us at some stage, or don't do things that would be good for us. So the trick we should be putting our energies into what will encourage people to do and find it more enjoyable.
Yes. So I'm looking forward for you to be able to break things down for us. That's going to be an easy way to understand, because a lot of people who are listening may not realise exactly what they can do to help prevent some of these things from happening in the future and improve what their bone health right now. I want to talk about the osteoporosis being known more as a silent disease. And like so many chronic conditions, it starts not when you find out that you've got it, but it starts to happen many years, or it can be even decades earlier. So from what I read recently, I read that current data shows about half the women over 50 will break a bone because of osteoporosis. And compared to men, older women are 4 times more likely to have osteoporosis. So women who are particularly from that age of 40 onwards, are at risk and vulnerable to unhealthy bones. Can you explain why this is?
Mm. So it's largely a function of size, body size, which equates to skeletal size. So smaller bones are more likely to break. And also probably an increased propensity to fall when you're older. Now, falls are the nemesis of osteoporosis because most people with osteoporosis who don't fall will never have a fracture. But 90% of hip fractures are a direct result of a fall. And this is why I do refer to muscle. Muscle and bone go together. You can't really separate them. We need to keep our muscles strong so we don't fall. Strong and working properly. Now, there's many things that increase your risk of osteoporosis, but it is largely genetic. So it's I think 70 to 80% of your risk of osteoporosis is in your genes. So you're born with small, weak bones compared to other people who don't fracture. So you look to your parents and see if they've had a fracture or they have the dowager's hump showing that they have, had some vertebral fractures that they might not have even been aware of, might not have been painful enough for them to be aware of that. Or your grandparents, people around you. If that's what they look like, or they've had falls and fractures, then you are definitely at risk. Now, if you look at the difference between male and female bone across the lifespan, men gain more bone. We all have the maximum bone we're ever going to have by the time we're 30, actually almost by the time we're 20.
Wow.
Men gain more bone, mainly because they're bigger than women, and they lose less across life because estrogen is very protective of bone. And when we go through menopause, the amount of circulating estrogen almost vanishes. So suddenly women's skeletons are exposed to this withdrawal of protection, if you like. And so there's this massive loss of bone, sort of around average age of menopause, about 54. So anywhere between sort of 50 and 60, we lose a lot of bone. So we gained less when we were young. We lose more as we age. So we end up with this big difference in bone health or bone strength at the end of life and an increased risk of falling. So the combination of those things make us more at risk of osteoporotic fracture.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I suppose for women who enter menopause earlier in their sort of mid-40s, early to mid-40s, they're probably even at more risk. And I know from my own personal case that because there's such a large family history of osteoporosis, I'm still 55 and in perimenopause, I haven't quite reached menopause yet. That was seen as one of the key indicators why I should go on to MHT. So, and having thyroxine, I'm also Hashimoto's thyroiditis. So certain medications can also cause an increased incidence. Is that the right word? I'm not sure the right word, but a likelihood of perhaps getting osteoporosis down the track.
I would use the term risk. So increases your risk. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So if we put all the risk factors into a big basket, the more of them you have, the more risk of an osteoporotic fracture. In fact, it sort of increases exponentially with each risk. It's not linear. So managing those risks are really important. So genes, as I've said, being female, being a very small stature, having very small bones, and age. Those are the main ones, and many you can't do anything about most of those things. So we're dealing with the other things we can do something about, and that's diet, exercise, your medications, and obviously there are some medications you must take, they're life preserving, but just being aware that certain medications do make you more at risk is a good way of really focusing your attention. Okay, well, that means I really do need to do something about it sooner rather than later. And as you mentioned, if you go through menopause early, it really is just sort of means that for more of your life, you're going to be at risk. It probably doesn't put you more at risk than someone who goes through menopause at a later age, if you had age equivalents there, but just having greater exposure to risk with lower bone mass for longer.
So being, while you can, and while there's that safe window of opportunity to go on menopause hormonal therapy, MHT or /HRT, is something that's not going to be the magic pill. Obviously, you need to do things in conjunction with that. But is that something that your research has shown as well? Because from what I've heard, and the Menopause Society and things, they do recommend that as a option.
Well, I haven't specifically done research myself on hormone therapy, but it's my understanding that for people who are at risk of low bone mass and osteoporotic fracture, if they are in the perimenopause and menopausal stage, then it is probably the first line of therapy to consider, just to keep your estrogen levels up for as long as possible, and it certainly is very protective of your bones. But each person would obviously need to make that decision in conjunction with their doctor, because each person would be at slightly different risk for being on that kind of therapy. So yeah, it's definitely, as far as I'm aware, it's considered to be the first thing you think of if you're in that young age group. If you're 70, then that horse is bolted.
Yes.
But in that age, definitely worth considering.
So being proactive in preventing or lessening the effects of osteoporosis is incredibly important. And, mine's a vested interest, and you'll have heard that in the introduction. Just seeing my mum firsthand becoming so frail, that was just so shocking. To see somebody who was able to garden and do things for herself to all of a sudden be hunched over in pain and unable to move. And then that just sent that whole cascade of other problems because of the fractures that she had. And also my two sisters having been diagnosed with osteoporosis in their early 60s. And that again, we've got so many more decades of life left ahead. That changed the whole direction of my life and how I decided to look after my own health, because the DEXA scan did show that I had osteopenia. So it meant that I had to do things differently. If I wanted my future to look a different way, it was up to me to take those steps. And I think for many people, it's empowering when they know that they can change what they're doing, and by doing what they're doing differently today can make that difference for their tomorrow. Can you just let me know what sort of things that you are doing in the bone clinic that is helping women to learn more about their own bodies and to empower them? Because what you're doing is just phenomenal.
Well, I suppose to go back a little as to how the bone clinic even came about. As an exercise physiologist, I've always been interested in what exercise is the best for bone, and particularly to prevent fracture. Now, osteoporosis is absolutely a whole of life consideration, and we know that if you maximize the physical activity in youth, you can optimize that peak bone mass that I was talking about that you gain almost by the time you're about 20. So lots of varied high intensity jumping and running and different kinds of activities, keeping your muscles really strong, just getting as much bone as you can when you're young. Then throughout life, you need to continue to be as active as you can with the same sort of exercises. Now, if you think about it, most of us never jump. If you think the last time, when did you jump or hop or do anything that sort of gave you a jolt when you landed? We don't do that. And worse, we're told when we're young that we should do everything to avoid that. Well, I completely disagree with that. Of course, you have to protect your joints. You don't want to be damaging those. But the more you maintain your ability to jump throughout your life, the more your joints will actually be able to tolerate it. Now, the trouble is when we get to a situation in older age where our bones are weaker, because we didn't have this knowledge, so we didn't know to do that throughout life, then it's a different kettle of fish, because those high intensity, high impact, high load exercises could be dangerous because your skeleton is weak, and that's when you're more likely to fracture. So for years, we all thought once you had osteoporosis, all we could do is give you falls prevention exercises just to stop you from, falling and fracturing. But the truth of the matter is nobody had actually tested that. No one had actually tested whether a high intensity impact and lifting program would grow bone in older age in people with low bone mass safely. So that's what the Lift More trial was. And we ran the Lift More trial. We started that in 2013. I believe that's 10 years ago now, with postmenopausal women with low to very low bone mass. So we came in twice a week, 30 minutes a session, supervised, and we got them lifting heavy and doing impact exercise. And at the end of 8 months, because you have to do this for a while to be able to detect a change in bone because it adapts slowly, we'd grown bone. We had one person have one back muscle strain. She went and had some physio, came back, kept lifting. No, it was, we found if it was supervised, implemented carefully, there was no problem. And people not only grew bone, but actually, because they couldn't see their bones, what they really cared about was that their quality of life just turned around. They were suddenly strong enough to do all the things that they hadn't been able to do for years, and they felt confident they could do it, except for the one woman who decided that she was so strong that she was going to move a fridge and she hurt herself. So there's safe lifting and there's unsafe lifting. So we also teach people how to do that. Anyway, long story short, we did a Lift More for Men study, found the exact same thing, and we opened the clinic. And the reason I opened the bone clinic is because ordinarily I would, when I do a clinical trial, I normally just publish it and move on. In this case, the exercise we were doing is risky. We only think that it should be done under supervision to protect people. So that's what the clinic is. We set up, it's a translational research clinic. So everyone who comes to us is a research participant. We do almost the same kind of testing we did in the Lift More study. They also see a dietitian, so they make sure that they're eating the correct building blocks for bone and muscle. And then they get the opportunity to do this lifting program, which we call Onero, under supervision, very carefully. There's a beginner stage. If you've got all kinds of things wrong with you, like you've got a frozen shoulder or you've got a dreadful pelvic floor or something, we put you into another phase to sort those out. And then when you're ready, you go into Onero and you do that. We're just finding the exact same outcomes at the clinic as we found in the trials. People are just getting stronger, growing bone, and getting their lives back. Wow. And that's basically in a nutshell.
Yeah, that's really exciting because and also I remember reading a book, Strong Women Stay Young, a long time ago, and they found similar types of study. Their study found similar sort of outcomes as well, and just the ability for people to get that independence back is huge. To suddenly not, and I think the more you do, the more you want to do as well, because then it changed how they might have done. They might go traveling more, or perhaps add more exercise into their day, or get out into the garden more, or just become more social. It has such a huge roll-on effect, doesn't it?
It does. That's exactly the point. Once you get stronger, you can do more. The more you can do, the better you'll be. And we have people who come to us who are utterly devastated because they've just been delivered the news by perhaps a GP who doesn't know a huge amount about exercise and how you can do it safely. And they'll say, right, you've got osteoporosis. I don't want you to lift your grandchild ever again. I don't want you to be carrying your shopping. These are things that people need to be able to do. And we can help them to do that. And the difference is we teach them how to do it safely. So, yes, you probably don't want to be lifting your grandchild up onto that really awkward, slippery slide in a weird position where you're leaning over. That we'd say, don't do that. But think of other ways to lift your grandchild. Squat down beside them, wrap your arms around them, hold them really close, and stand up using your legs, not your back. Those sorts of things. So we're teaching ways to protect your spine, as well as ways to make it stronger and to make your muscles stronger so you're not falling, and to just get your life back. Who wants to be scared for the rest of their life, you know?
That's right. So you mentioned earlier on the importance of building bone at a younger age, and particularly, if you're looking at 20 as being the almost 20 to 30 at the peak bone density time. How do you see the sedentary lifestyle of a lot of the younger generation, but in reality, because I used to see my own children at times where they could have been out and about, were sitting, but that's they were still relatively active and quite active compared to others. What do you do with those kids and teenagers who are really couch potatoes? Because that's looking long term. That's not good.
It's not good. It's the $1 million question, isn't it? And it hasn't just been in the computer age, because I think television did a lot of that too. You know, in the old days, you'd come home from school and you'd go out with your mates on the street, and you'd just be mucking around out there. Whereas probably by the 70s, you had kids coming home, getting a snack and sitting in front of television. And it has been like this for a long time. And it probably partly explains why there is this explosion of sarcopenia and osteopenia now. I just, I started my life as a PE teacher, actually. I taught PE for 2 years. And I used to battle against this, the tendency for schools, and I'm sure it comes from parents, to value only academics. Because, there are many kids in our schools who will never go into academic heavy careers, but all of us need our health. So what we should be teaching in schools is healthy physical activity and engagement. What an opportunity. You have a captive audience. Let's get them out every single day doing healthy activity. Good for their heart, good for their bones, good for their muscles, good for their mental health. I've been banging on that drum for years, but whereas I've been saying we need to do more, the tendency in schools is we're doing less because we're more concerned about academics. Well, let's get that balance right. I believe in New South Wales, I don't think they even have dedicated PE teachers in primary schools. When I found that out, I was gobsmacked. That's like asking a PE teacher to go and teach maths. You don't ask the maths teacher to teach PE. They're not trained. We need expert movement specialists and health and physical education specialists in schools. It shouldn't be the thing that falls away in year 12. And I know my son doesn't have to do any physical activity now. He's in year 12. Most important thing is getting their scores. Okay, maybe I'm pushing it there with year 12. I understand everybody wants to get them, but it shouldn't be dropping away until then, you know?
Yeah. No, it'll be interesting to see what happens in the next, 10, 20, 30 years on how it's impacting on the health of young people now. So if anyone who's listening to this podcast wants to know more about the state of their bone health, what should they do? What's their first step?
So possibly mention it with your GP at your next appointment. If you have a family history and you don't need to go to the doctor for any other reason, you can still make an appointment based on that, saying, I want to be referred for a bone density scan and see what my bones are like. This is preventative. I'm being proactive. If you find yourself in the unfortunate position of having a fracture, and oftentimes this is how we discover we have osteoporosis, falling on an outstretched hand and fracturing your wrist. And this happens a lot in these sort of middle ages. Now, if you just fall onto your wrist, you shouldn't break your forearm. So if you do, that's a big flag. It probably does mean that you've at least got osteopenia. Now, if your doctor, when you go to the doctor and have this thing put in a cast, doesn't send you for a bone density, they should be. And so you need to ask, you need to push for that, because we do know that there is, the message is not necessarily getting through to all doctors. So This is not necessarily their fault. Oftentimes people go to the doctor for a reason and they get sidetracked because there's so many other things that come up. But it is important to push that argument. Now, if people live near us in Brisbane or the surrounds, and we actually have people coming from all over the country, actually sometimes even from over the world, to come to us to get a really good bone consult, we will do the bone scans. So we have a DEXA in our facility, so you can find out. But it's much more practical. Not everybody lives in Brisbane, to just go to your GP and request a bone density scan.
And how often should you be doing that, just to monitor it? Because once you've got that baseline data, you can then, monitor as the years go on. So how often should you be doing that?
Well, we think it should be done annually, but the government only reimburses these scans every 2 years. And that's for people who are either, obviously at increased risk, or they've already had a fracture. So, and this is because obviously the reimbursement schemes are not a bottomless pit. So they've got to sort of make a cut somewhere. But with us, if you come to the clinic, we'll do it for you every year, because a lot can happen in a year. If you happen to have a really bad bout of some respiratory condition and you're on prednisone for a couple of months, prednisone is terrible for bones. You can lose, many percent of your bone mineral density because of that. And so if you wait 2 years, you might be going down faster than you think. But bone density scans are not very expensive. You can actually, just pay for them yourself. It's $100 or so, so probably worth doing.
Yes. So we've mentioned osteoporosis and osteopenia kind of interchangeably, and they're both very different. So can you, I don't think we've gone through exactly what both mean, so people are really crystal clear on what those two terms mean.
Yeah. So the World Health Organization defined what was considered to be normal bone mass, what was low, and what's very low. So the difference is low is osteopenia and very low is osteoporosis. So obviously if you have osteoporosis, very low bone mass, you are at much more increased risk of fracture just because your bones are weaker. However, many, many, many more people have osteopenia. And this means that actually most of the fractures happen in people who are only osteopenic. So this is just a statistical effect, because there are more people with osteopenia. But the reason I say it is because if you go to have a bone scan and they say, well, you're not at risk because you don't have osteoporosis yet, that is not true. You are absolutely at increased risk if you have osteopenia. Now, I can give you the T-score values, if you like, that define what those criteria are, but you probably will forget them. They'll just be numbers. A T-score of minus 2.5 is what defines you as osteoporotic. But don't, as I say, that's not a magic number. If you have osteopenia, which is minus 1 to minus 2.5, you are still at risk and you need to be doing something about it.
You can increase your bone mass, that's correct, through the exercise. What's some of the great stories that you can share, just so people go, for me, I've been able to change my score, so I'm no longer in that osteopenic range. But what's some really great stories that you can share with us of success that you've seen with some of your clients?
Oh, we have multiple success stories. And it's not magic. You have to put the work in. But we have people who have come in with osteoporosis by T-score, and they have ended up in the normal range, so they have been able to get back to what is considered to be normal. Now, that doesn't happen all the time, and if you're extremely low, then it would be highly unlikely that you would. But the difference is, at least you're not losing more, you are gaining some, and really importantly, you're gaining muscle strength so that you're not likely to fall. So it's, the success stories are thick and fast, really, and I look at them from a quality of life standpoint. So, some people will come to us on a walker. They're so frail because they've become so weak over the years that they need a walker. And 8 weeks later, no walker, standing on one leg,
Wow.
and feeling like their balance has returned because their muscles are speaking to their nerves again. And, I'm not saying that everyone's going to be able to, fling away a walking stick if they've had terrible hip osteoarthritis. And there will be some modifications to the program if they're in that sort of condition. But I can guarantee they will definitely be better off doing this lifting than not doing it.
Yes.
One way to go when you're really bad, and that's up.
Yeah. So what's something that you could start, a person could start off with? Like a woman may not even be in a danger zone with regards to her bone health, but wants to make sure that she remains that way. Or, you could be in a danger zone. What's one thing or a couple of things that you suggest that women start with? Because putting things off is great. What we often do as women, we'll do it one day, we'll get to it. But what's a couple of easy things that you could put into your day that might start to make a difference?
Well, movement, any kind of movement. And I say that with some caveats. So firstly, the recommendation will be different depending on your ability. If we've got a relatively able, healthy woman who's sort of between the ages of 50 and 70, and they're quite mobile and reasonably functionally independent, then just about anything is going to be better than not doing anything. But I would strongly recommend a resistance training program, getting your muscles stronger. Doing that with somebody who can supervise you is definitely going to be better than not, because the worst thing you can do is injure yourself, because then you're not going to want to keep doing it. If somebody's very frail, then the best thing that they can do, again, I would strongly recommend supervision. But if someone's so frail that they spend most of their time sitting, I would encourage them to get up and down out of their chair as often as they can during the day. And they will find the more they do that, the more easy it is for them to get up and down out of the chair. And then walk a little further with somebody. Don't walk by yourself if you're very frail. You increase your risk of a fracture. And then start doing little exercises like going up and down on your toes, squatting, just going, not actually sitting on a chair, but going down and then coming back up again, doing lunges, everything that's going to strengthen the ability of your legs to get you up again if you've gone down, and practicing things like lying down on the floor and getting up again, because one of the worst things that can happen if you fall is not being able to get up again. So yeah, those recommendations are very different for frail people than for people who are still quite capable.
Yeah.
I should say, I'm not, you notice I'm not recommending, if people are trying to build bone, walking is not going to do it, swimming is not going to do it, and cycling is not going to do it. It is not going to increase your bone. However, all of those things are better than doing nothing.
Yes. Yeah, that's interesting. And what about the diet side of things? Is there anything that, movement is definitely something that everyone should be aiming for? Is there something that they can start to put in their diet that you would recommend?
Yeah, well, firstly, I'd probably recommend a proper dietitian consult, because everybody's got different preferences, but different tolerances and allergies and things. And, across if a generic sort of recommendation is to increase your dairy. And I know that instantly 50% of your listeners will go, that's not for me. For whatever reason, they don't like it, they can't tolerate it, or they've read that it's associated with other things. As far as I'm aware, there is no evidence that dairy is associated with an increased risk of cancer or any of those other things. That the most of the good science has shown that those sorts of fears are not true. What it is beneficial for is calcium for your bones, which is dairy is very bioavailable, meaning it's easy to absorb, whereas the calcium that's in green veg is not as easy to absorb. Lots of it, but it's harder for us to get it. So dairy is good. If you can up your dairy, that's half the battle. It's also got a bunch of protein in it, which is really good for your muscles. So we want calcium. We also need vitamin D. We can't absorb the calcium from our gut if we don't have enough vitamin D. So that means it's not that easy to get vitamin D in your diet. You've got to be eating a lot of butter and red meat and mushrooms. and you know, they're not high on everybody's list. So unless you're my husband, who eats copious amounts. But what you can do safely, and I know we are very sun averse in this country, as we should be at the dangerous times of day, but go out in the sun and get a little bit of sun before the danger hours. Never get burnt, but a little bit of sun on your skin is a very effective way of getting your vitamin D. And also there are other benefits of sun exposure. So it's not just about vitamin D. So I'm a sun advocate. I don't have a massive tan or anything like that. I'm not recommending that. But before 10 and after 2 in most places, depends where you are, is okay to get about 15 minutes of sun, and it's good for you. The other thing I mentioned is protein. Protein is very important. We do have a little bit of a tea and toast brigade in the older age groups because, and if I don't have a husband later in my life, that's how I'm going to be, because I'm too lazy to cook myself decent food. But I will have to force myself, because tea and toast is not nutritious.
Yeah.
So replace that with a handful of almonds and so get yourself some hummus and crackers, just anything that's got a bit more nutrition in it. That's better.
Oh, that's some great advice. And sun's free. You can supplement your diet with certain things, and movement. A lot of the things that you could do, you may be able to do without any cost as well. So yeah, that's it. Well, what if you've got dodgy knees and you can't jump?
That's an excellent question, because there are so
good,
many.
because that's me. I thought I'll start skipping and doing things just to... No,
you're not alone. We have a progression for people to try and get to the point where they can jump, but some can never jump because their knees are just completely toast. So we do things like stomping and heel drops, and just whatever you can manage is what you're aiming for. A little bit of a jolt. Your skeleton needs to be jolted. Just pain is never good. If something you're doing is actually painful, not like muscle soreness and tiredness, that's different, but pain is the body's signal that you're doing something wrong and you shouldn't be doing it. So if you've got pain, don't do that impact, do something else.
And you've given some great advice there, and people can work on that for themselves and dream for the future of being vibrant and independent as they are now, as well as much as they are now into their later years. Let's think about the dream. I'd love to know your dreams and your hopes for the bone clinic. What are you hoping to happen with that? Because it's so phenomenal what you're finding and what you're doing.
Yeah, well, ideally there'd be an Onero provider in every town, multiple if it's a big town, so that everybody has access to expert supervision for an effective exercise program for muscle and bone. I mean, that is the ideal. And in parallel, the government needs to begin reimbursing exercise as medicine. Exercise is so much more effective than many of the reimbursed drugs for so many conditions that this is what is stopping many people from doing it, because they can't afford it or they prefer not to. They would rather have, a couple of bougie coffees a week than do exercise. And that's absolutely, that's probably their passion, and I understand that. So for those people, we probably need to make it more accessible, more affordable, and let's just get real about that with our priorities.
Yeah, the social aspect of what you're doing at the clinic is huge too, isn't it? Because there's that accountability where you go a couple of times a week. You've got the social aspect as well. That when you can weave that into it, what you're doing it makes a huge difference. Doing it by yourself is harder. It can be done, but doing it in a group setting makes it easier and better.
You're 100% correct. group classes are the way to go. And so we have licensed the program, and we have so there are many Onero providers around the country. So it's not just at the clinic in Brisbane. And that's what we say to them. We maximum of 8 in a class, because we need to be able to keep eyes on everybody to look after them. But it is important to have a group class for exactly that reason. And, you know, many of the people who have been coming and training with us for 8 years now, they have firm friendships. They go out for coffee after class. You know, they rush to book the specific class that they go to twice a week, every week. So they're in the same class with the same people. And they celebrate each other's successes. Someone will have their bone density scan and say, oh, I gained 5%. Yay, you did. So it's motivating. It's reassuring, you know, oh, someone hasn't turned up today. I wonder what's wrong. And then they'll check on each other. And so the social side of it is absolutely vital, not just for the bone outcomes, but for mental health.
Yeah, it is. That's an important part of isn't it? Being a human is being able to share things and do things together. And it's a lot of the things that I do with the ladies that I work with. That's an important component, is that social aspect and that accountability and that friendship and the just talking things through, because you've got somebody who gets where you're coming from as well, which is great.
Exactly. And the I don't have mirrors on the wall. We don't have doof music. We got people come in.
Are you even a bone clinic then?
People come in their gardening and their dodgy shoes, and it doesn't matter what anybody looks. We haven't got the guy with the massive bicep over in the corner that's scary. Everybody is there for one reason, to look after their bones, and the secondary reason of just being with like-minded people who are, you know, it's not a gym mentality, it's a health mentality.
No, that's fabulous. And that's a big difference, isn't it? Is health.
Yeah, that's right. And many people find gyms quite intimidating, you know, and I don't necessarily want to be walking around in my 59-year-old glory beside the 20-year-old in spandex.
I'm with you. What's the number one takeaway message you'd like the listeners to be left with after we, you know, concluding our conversation today?
A diagnosis of low bone mass or osteoporosis is not a death sentence. There is something you can do. You absolutely can prevent fractures. The best, you know, there are many ways to do that. Talk to your doctor. They will almost certainly recommend medications which may be appropriate for you, but always consider exercise, because it gives you the double whammy of growing bone and preventing falls. And it is never too early to start. You may not have osteoporosis yet, but you want to prevent it rather than wait till you have it. That's absolutely, prevent the first fracture is what we want to do. And exercise is a really powerful, vital tool to do that.
Oh, that's a great one. Now, on a more personal note, we'll just have a couple of quick questions. What's your number one daily non-negotiable for you with regards to your health and wellness?
It sounds funny, but I have to read a good book for at least 10 minutes before I go to sleep. I look forward to it. I love it. And even if I'm exhausted, I just love that reading and that story. And yeah, it's good.
So on your bedside table, is that a non-fiction or a fiction?
Both. Yeah, I'm a Charles Dickens fan. I've been reading a lot of the classics. But I also am reading the diary of Charles Darwin when he was on the Beagle, and that's fascinating too. So, but sometimes I just want to read some fluff.
Yeah. Well, when you're living in the world of academia and research papers, I can imagine that you would. What are you most looking forward to in this next half of life? So you've got such a big full life right now with all you're doing. What else are you looking forward to that may not be with regards to work?
I have lots of interests that I never get a chance to do. I have a love of doing artistic things, and I would love to learn how to be a glass blower. I don't know that I'm going to be able to, because I don't have the setup, but I love blown glass and I'd love to be able to do it.
That's amazing. That is not what I expected you to say at all, but I love it. Yeah.
Well, that, and I'd love to be able to fly a helicopter, but I don't think I can afford that. So
Glass blowing it is. Bit of a difference, but yeah, that's great. Okay, final question. If you could look into the future, what do you hope 80-year-old Belinda will say about current day Belinda?
Geez, that's a hard one. Probably that I did my job to the absolute nth degree and squeezed every bit of benefit for mankind out of it.
Love it. Thank you. And thank you for all that you do. Thank you for your time today. Thank you for all the research and the passion that you have that's driving what you're doing to reach even more and more people. So it's incredible.
My pleasure.
On a side note, there was one question that I forgot to ask during the podcast, and this is really important. If a woman's been diagnosed with osteopenia or osteoporosis and she doesn't live near or is able to access a bone clinic nearby, what can she do? Because there's lots of things that you can suggest for her.
Yeah, that's true. So there's 3 different things they can do. They can either call the bone clinic and we can do a telehealth appointment with them. So they can actually talk to one of my EPs, exercise physiologists, give us their background, what sort of ability they already have, what they already do, what they can and can't do, and what they like, and so on. And we'll give them a program that they can either take to the gym or do by themselves at home if they've got any gear. And they can also talk to our dietitian if they want through telehealth to help with their diet. If that's no good, they can also sign up to Onero online, which is a very low-cost program. It's not Onero. It's not the face-to-face supervised Onero we do in the clinic. It is a balance and mobility program which is designed to slightly load bone and muscle, but primarily stop people from falling. So if you just Google Onero online, you'll be able to find that. And the other thing is, I'll send you the link to our Onero location map, which if you click on that, you can zoom into your area and you'll see logos of any Onero licensees. So these are people who are licensed to deliver our Onero program in under supervised conditions. They're fully trained. And if you've got one near you, you can go there and get the exact same program. And to find them, you click on the actual logo and their contact details will drop down.
Brilliant. How do you spell that? Just I'm trying to work out if the actual
Onero is Onero.
Okay,
it's the Latin word for overload. That's why we called it that.
Okay, well there you go. Thanks so much, and I'll add all of those links to the show notes so you've got them direct. If you want to click on those, it'll take you straight there.
Brilliant.
All right, terrific. Thanks so much. Thanks so much for listening and sharing your time with me today. I'd love you to hit subscribe on Apple Podcast or your favourite podcast app to keep spreading these empowering messages. Please share this podcast with other incredible midlife women in your world. Join me again next week for another redefining midlife conversation. Thanks again for tuning in.